Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that I think is on a lot of people's minds these days, and that's the impact of modern life on our mental well-being and attention spans.
Yeah, and especially, when we think about how this plays out in education parenting and, our relationship with technology, it's a big topic.
It is a huge topic. So to help us kind of wade through all of this, we've got some really interesting sources to draw on. We're going to be looking at Johann Hari's books, Lost Connections and Stolen Focus.
And we'll also be bringing in some insights from Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation.
So yeah, if you're a parent, an educator, or just someone who's, trying to make sense of this crazy world that we're living in, I think you're really going to find this deep dive insightful.
One of the things that Hari does that's so interesting in Lost Connections is that he really challenges that prevailing narrative around depression, that it's simply a chemical imbalance in the brain.
Right? It's like it's almost become this kind of accepted truth that, depression is just a biological issue. You take a pill and that's it.
But Hari presents a really compelling argument that it's much more complex than that social and environmental factors play a much bigger role than we often realize.
And he even cites research showing that antidepressants, while they can be helpful for some people, they also have a surprisingly large placebo effect.
Right. Which suggests that our beliefs and expectations about treatment can really influence our experience of it.
That's so fascinating to me. It really makes you think about how much of our mental well-being is tied to factors that are actually outside of ourselves.
Absolutely. It's not just about what's happening in our brains, it's about how we live, how we work, how we connect with others. All of these things contribute.
Yeah. So speaking of those external factors, Hari argues that there are actually 9 distinct causes of depression and anxiety. And a lot of them are really rooted in the way that we've structured our society.
9, that's a lot to think about.
It is. It's kind of overwhelming when you think about it.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with that?
Well, I think one place to start is with young people. They're constantly bombarded with these messages about achievement and success.
Especially through social media, right? It's
Wow.
like this curated highlight reel of everyone else's seemingly perfect lives.
Exactly. And they're encouraged to pursue this very narrow definition of success. Often it involves, intense competition and pressure to excel.
And I think that creates this system that almost sets kids up for anxiety and burnout right from the get-go.
Yeah, they're starting from this place of pressure. And I think Hari would say that that contributes significantly to the rising rates of depression and anxiety that we're seeing.
And it's not just about the pressure to succeed, though,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Hari also talks a lot about this sense of disconnection that people feel.
Yeah, we're more connected than ever before technologically, but so many people are incredibly isolated and lonely.
It's like we're surrounded by all these online friends, but we still feel deeply alone.
That's exactly it. And I think Hari's argument is that this disconnect from meaningful relationships, from community, from a sense of purpose, that's another key driver of depression and anxiety.
And I think for young people in particular, that plays out in some really interesting ways.
How so?
Well, think about how kids interact socially these days. It's often through these carefully curated online personas, right? It's like they're presenting this idealized version of themselves.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like they're constantly performing for an audience.
Exactly. And I think that can create this intense pressure to be perfect. And then when you combine that with this overprotective parenting style that's become so prevalent, it's like a recipe for anxiety.
And that actually ties in perfectly with Haidt's work in The Anxious Generation. He argues that the combination of overprotective parenting and the rise of social media has created this kind of perfect storm for anxiety in young people.
It's like we're coddling kids on the one hand, but then we're exposing them to all of these intense pressures on the other hand.
Yeah, it's this weird paradox. And it's not giving kids the opportunity to develop resilience or coping mechanisms or a sense of agency in the real world.
And I think that's something we really need to be thinking about, especially in education.
You're right. How can we expect kids to learn and thrive if they're coming to school already feeling anxious and overwhelmed?
It's a huge challenge for educators.
Yeah.
But it seems like we need to start rethinking the very foundations of our education system.
I think so too. Maybe moving away from this emphasis on rote learning and standardized tests and towards something that's more holistic, more human-centered.
Yeah. We need to be teaching kids skills like creativity and critical thinking and collaboration and emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. Because those are the skills that are going to be essential for success in the 21st century, not just memorizing facts and figures.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about depression, anxiety, the pressures that young people are facing. But I think we also need to talk about technology and its impact on our attention spans.
For sure. That's where Hari's stolen focus comes in.
Right. He goes really deep into how technology is designed to capture our attention and to keep us hooked.
And he even conducted this really interesting experiment on himself where he went offline for 3 months just to see what would happen.
And it's fascinating what he discovered. He found that he was able to experience something called a flow state much more easily without all of the distractions of technology.
Remind me what a flow state is again.
Yeah, so flow is that feeling of being completely absorbed in an activity, where you lose track of time and you feel totally present and engaged.
Oh, yeah, like when you're really into a project or a hobby or even just having a deep conversation.
Exactly. And Hari's argument is that our devices are constantly interrupting our flow, making it almost impossible to achieve that level of focus and engagement that we need to do our best work and to feel truly fulfilled.
And it's not just the devices themselves, it's the way they're designed, right? These companies are using all sorts of sophisticated techniques to keep us scrolling and clicking and consuming.
Right? It's like they're playing on our vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
exploiting our desire for connection and novelty and instant gratification.
And the stakes are high, because not only is this affecting our ability to focus and learn and create, but it's also impacting our mental health and well-being.
Which is a huge concern for parents, especially those who are trying to navigate their kids' relationship with technology. Where do we draw the line? How do we set healthy boundaries in a world where screens are everywhere?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we'll definitely be digging into more as we continue this deep dive.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break.
One of the things that really stood out to me in Stolen Focus was that analogy that Hari uses about the campfire.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He talks about how a campfire can be so easily extinguished if there's too much wind.
Right, exactly. And our attention is kind of like that campfire, constantly being bombarded by these, winds of distraction.
It's such a vivid image. It
Mhm.
really makes you realize how fragile our focus can be in this modern world.
For sure. And the good news is that Hari doesn't just, point out the problem. He actually offers some solutions.
Yeah, he talks about things like attention restoration theory and the importance of spending time in nature.
Right. He says that even short periods of time in nature can help to restore our attention. It's like hitting the reset button on our brains.
So simple, but so powerful.
I know, right? It makes you want to go for a walk in the park right now.
Seriously. And it's not just about nature, though, right? Hari also talks about the importance of creating these intentional practices to help us focus.
Like what kind of practices?
Well, things like setting boundaries with technology, having those designated tech-free zones in our homes, or even just practicing mindfulness.
Those are all great ideas, and I think they're especially relevant when we think about education.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine if schools were designed with these principles in mind.
It would be revolutionary, wouldn't it? Schools could become these havens for focus and deep learning, where kids are actually encouraged to cultivate their attention spans rather than constantly battling distractions.
So what would that look like, practically? How would we actually implement those ideas in a school setting?
Well, I think it starts with the physical environment, right? Creating classrooms that are calming and conducive to concentration.
Lots of natural light, maybe some plants and other elements of nature.
Exactly. And then maybe rethinking the role of technology in the classroom.
I'm not saying ban it completely, but maybe using it more intentionally and strategically.
Right. Because it can be a powerful learning tool, but it can also be a huge source of distraction. So it's all about finding that balance.
And beyond the physical space, what about the actual curriculum? How can we teach kids to be more focused and attentive?
Well, mindfulness practices could be a great addition to the school day. Teaching kids how to be more present and aware of their thoughts and feelings.
I love that. And what about teaching them specific strategies for managing distractions?
Like time management techniques and prioritization skills and the ability to single task rather than multitask.
Those are such valuable life skills.
Yeah,
And it's never too early to start learning them.
exactly. But all of this sounds great in theory, right? The question is, how do we make it a reality?
It seems like a huge undertaking to actually change the way we approach education.
It is a big challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. There are already schools and educators out there who are implementing these principles and seeing amazing results.
That's so encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to highlight those success stories, to show people that it can be done.
Absolutely, because it can feel really overwhelming to think about making these kinds of changes. But when you see that other people are doing it successfully, it gives you hope.
Okay, so we've talked about some potential solutions for reclaiming our attention. But I want to shift gears a little bit and go back to Haidt's work in the anxious generation.
Sounds good. What specifically did you want to talk about?
Well, one of the things that really struck me was his argument that we've become too risk-averse in our parenting.
He calls it safetyism, right? This
Right.
tendency to shield kids from any potential harm or discomfort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And his argument is that this is actually backfiring, preventing kids from developing the resilience and coping skills that they need to navigate the inevitable challenges of life.
It's like we're trying to protect them from pain, but in doing so, we're actually making them more vulnerable.
It's counterintuitive, but it makes sense. So how do we find that balance between protecting our kids and empowering them to take risks?
Well, Haidt suggests that we need to give kids more opportunities for unstructured play, where they can explore and experiment and learn to manage risks on their own.
That's something that comes up again and again in these conversations about childhood, the importance of free play.
It's not just about having fun. It's about developing essential social, emotional, and cognitive skills.
And Haidt also talks about the importance of allowing kids to experience failure.
Yeah, to learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
To realize that failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of the process.
Which is so hard as a parent, right?
Yeah.
Because we want to protect our kids from disappointment. But sometimes those setbacks are the most valuable learning experiences.
For sure. And I think this has implications for education as well. We need to create learning environments where it's okay to make mistakes.
Where kids feel safe to experiment and to try new things without fear of judgment or failure.
Exactly. Because that's how real learning happens. Through trial and error. Through pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones.
Okay, so we've talked about free play and the importance of failure. What about technology? How do we navigate that as parents?
Well, Haidt is definitely a proponent of setting clear boundaries and limits around screen time.
But he also talks about the importance of quality over quantity.
Exactly. It's not just about how much time kids are spending on screens. It's about what they're doing with that time.
Are they passively consuming content, or are they engaging in activities that are creative or educational or socially meaningful?
That's the key distinction. And it's something that we as adults need to be mindful of as well.
You mean our own technology use?
Absolutely. Because we're modeling those behaviors for our kids. If we're constantly glued to our phones and checking emails at the dinner table, what message are we sending?
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And it's not easy. We're all bombarded with these distractions, but we have to make a conscious effort to create a healthier relationship with technology for ourselves and for our kids.
I think one of the things that gives me hope amidst all of this is the fact that we're having these conversations.
Me too. The fact that we're recognizing the problems and actively seeking solutions, that's a really positive sign.
And it's not about going back to some idealized past, before technology existed. It's about consciously shaping a future where technology serves humanity rather than the other way around.
I love that. It's about taking back control and using these tools to create a world that's more connected and compassionate and fulfilling.
Okay, so we've explored the challenges. We've started to identify some solutions. But what can we do practically to put these ideas into action? Let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive. So we've really dug deep into some tough stuff in this deep dive. All this stuff about depression and anxiety and attention, and then how technology kind of plays into all of it.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to process.
It is. But I think, even with all these challenges that we've been talking about, there's still a lot of hope.
Oh, for sure.
Like, we've talked about the problems, but we've also found some pretty powerful solutions and strategies.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways from all of this, from both Hari and Haidt, is that community and connection are so important.
Yes, absolutely. Like Hari talks about how feeling connected to something bigger than yourself, whether it's a community or a cause or even nature, it can be so powerful for combating depression and anxiety.
And Haidt really emphasizes fostering those genuine social connections in the real world, especially for kids who are growing up in this increasingly digital and sometimes isolating world.
Okay, so that all sounds good in theory, but what does that actually look like, in practice? How do we actually build stronger communities and create more opportunities for people to connect with each other?
Well, I think it starts with just recognizing the value of face-to-face interaction.
Putting down our phones.
Exactly. Putting down our phones, looking up from our screens, and actually engaging with the people around us.
It sounds so simple.
I know, right? But it's something that we often forget to do.
We really do. And it's not just about those like casual interactions, in passing.
Right. It's about putting in the effort to cultivate those meaningful relationships with people who share our values and interests.
So joining a club or volunteering or even just making time to get together with friends and family on a regular basis.
Exactly. And for parents, creating those opportunities for their kids to interact with other kids in real life.
Through sports or after-school activities or just playing in the park.
Exactly. It's all about fostering those social skills and that emotional intelligence that are so important for building healthy relationships.
And it's not just about quantity either, right? It's about quality.
Absolutely. It's about creating those spaces where people feel safe and supported and seen.
And I think that's something that schools can play a huge role in.
Oh, totally. Imagine schools where kids actually feel connected to their peers and their teachers and their community.
Where they feel valued for who they are and not just for their grades.
Yeah, and where they have those opportunities to collaborate and contribute and make a difference.
I love that vision of education.
Me too. And it's not just about schools and families either. It's about all of us doing our part to create a more connected and compassionate world.
Right. So even just small acts of kindness, reaching out to someone who's lonely, being more present in our daily interactions, all those things can make a difference.
They really can. Because when we recognize that we're all interconnected, that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others, I think that changes everything.
Yeah, and that brings us back to that idea of meaning and purpose.
Which is something that both Hari and Haidt talk about quite a bit.
Absolutely. They both emphasize how important it is to find something that gives our lives meaning, something that connects us to something larger than ourselves. So whether that's through meaningful work or engaging in acts of service or connecting with nature, there are so many different ways to find that sense of purpose.
And I think for young people, it's especially important to help them find their passions and develop their talents and find ways to contribute to their communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What gives your life meaning?
What are you passionate about? What are your values? What kind of impact do you want to make on the world?
Those are big questions.
They are, but they're worth thinking about.
Because when we find that thing, that thing that gives our lives meaning, it not only fuels our own sense of purpose, but it also ripples out and creates a positive impact on the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, so thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into, all the complexities of modern life and the search for connection and meaning and well-being.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this conversation has given you some new ideas and maybe inspired you to take action. And most importantly, we hope it's given you a sense of hope for the future.
Because even though things can feel really challenging, sometimes there's always hope.
We're all in this together. And together, we can create a world that's more connected, more compassionate, and more fulfilling for everyone.